What's up, fellas? In this video I'm going to share with you 4 things about a chainsaw that 95% of users don't even know about. And second, I am going to talk about what is the best chainsaw, which comes to find out is a very hard question to answer. Not bad with a sharp blade. So here we go. Things most people don't know. Number 1, right here on a chainsaw, there's a little oiler hole that you're supposed to put oil in. Now this has never been an issue for me because I use a butter bowl full of oil and just dip the whole saw in there sometimes when I'm doing a lot of heavy cutting. But lo and behold, there's a little needle bearing in there with a hole. I knew there was some kind of wheel in there, but I didn't know there was a nice little needle bearing of that caliber inside of there. So yes, so that's the first thing. I never knew that was there. A lot of people probably don't, so I just thought I'd share that with you. Now second, depth gauge. What is a depth gauge? Well, every chainsaw blade has this secondary little tooth here that we've all seen. This is the cutting tooth here, and these other teeth here are called depth gauges, and they keep these cutting teeth from digging in too deep. There's a certain aspect of cutting characteristic based on how deep these teeth cut, so they say every other time you sharpen the blade that you should rub down these depth gauges a little bit. And it is these depth gauges that can pretty much end the life to a good chainsaw blade if you eventually just wear them down too far. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the fuel ratios. A lot of people don't know why certain chainsaws have different fuel ratios and this and that, and from the research that I've done, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of it has to do with emissions. If you live in California, you're going to see a 50-to-1 ratio on your chainsaws. Here's a little thing that I wrote down a few days ago. Back in the day, we saw a lot of 32-to-1, which really protected your engine, but turns out it was bad for emissions. You see a lot of 40-to-1 and a lot of 50-to-1 these days. I tend to stray into this area here. Even if my chainsaw calls for 50-to-1, I'm not putting that crap in my tool. I'm running a pretty good oil mix. I want my stuff protected. And like I said, from what I got to reading about these things, a lot of that is cracked down to emissions. So I was kind of worried about how clear some of this gas was, so I looked into it. I just didn't like how it didn't seem as if it had any oil in it. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is hard starts. Why are these things such a pain in the ass to start sometimes? What is it about them that makes them so hard to start? Well, I've got 2 answers for you on that subject. The first one being is the spark plug gap. If your spark plug gap isn't perfect on these things, it's going to affect the timing slightly, which is a huge issue when it comes to starting your engine. The gap on these particular chainsaws, and on most of them that I've seen, is 0.025. 0.025. I'm pretty sure that's thousandths of an inch. Or no, that can't be right. Let me double check something real quick here. Yeah, I don't know what that's referring to. Yeah, thousandths of an inch. 25 thousandths of an inch is the, that's also 0.635 on the metric. 0.635 millimeter. So the spark plug gap, if that isn't perfect, these things ain't going to want to start. The second thing that causes these things not to want to start are these bolts here on the bottom. Also, any crankcase bolt or carburetor bolt on a 2-cycle engine is going to vibrate loose. You'll notice a lot of them don't have Loctite or even lock washers. And I believe that that's a constituent of planned obsolescence. I'm not sure about that, but it just seems kind of stupid you wouldn't use Loctite. And the reason for that being called stupid is that when these bolts vibrate loose just a little bit, the crankcase now has a vacuum leak. Two-cycle engines are heavily dependent on their crankcase to cycle the fuel into the engine. When the piston heads up towards TDC, it pulls a fuel mixture into the crankcase, which lubricates the needle bearings on the crankshaft and fills that chamber up with gas. And when the piston comes back down, it pushes that fuel mixture into the combustion chamber. The problem is when these bolts get slightly loose, that crankcase now has a vacuum leak. Sometimes you'll notice maybe a chainsaw or weed eater or leaf blower or any two-cycle engine will seem like it might be leaking gas, like you get a couple of drips maybe, and you'll just think you flooded it or something, but that's not what's going on. You have a leaky crankcase, and all you need to do is tighten the bolts down. That will also solve hard starts sometimes when it's just a little bit loose, and you really have to pull it hard to get it to start. That's because you have vacuum leaks, and you're not pulling your fuel mixture through the carburetor in a way that's good enough to aspirate the fuel properly. So that's just a couple of little tidbits that I really wish I would have learned when I first bought a chainsaw. Now, on the subject, what is the best chainsaw? Turns out that question's impossible to answer for any one user. If you chop down trees for a living, you're certainly not going to want a chainsaw you can buy at Lowe's or any box store for that matter. You're going to want something that has a motorcycle engine on it with a 25-inch blade or 45-inch, whatever they do. But if you're just going to use it occasionally for a wood burner or something like that, you don't want to spend a lot of money. I have found this brand to be the best chainsaw. That's just my opinion. I've also found that the term best chainsaw is going to turn up a lot of opinions. I have had a lot of luck with this brand. This thing has not broken down on me yet. I haven't had any problems starting it, and it was pretty cheap. I'm thinking it was 130 bucks. I'm not sure. I'll put a link in the description where you can check the prices on this thing. But if you're looking for a decent chainsaw at a decent price, they have the Poulan and the Poulan Pro. The Poulan Pro is a series that was made for people who are in landscaping, who are going to use this thing every day, and it has some kind of spring actuated system on it that makes it easy on the user. That's all it is. That's the only difference. There's some kind of springs in the handle or something weird like that. I'll check into that, but for the most part, you might as well just buy this one. You don't need the Pro, in my opinion. If you're just chopping wood for a fireplace or something, or for upkeep on a piece of property, in my opinion, this is the best chainsaw. When this thing breaks down, I'll do an update and I'll give you an idea of how long it lasted. So far I've had it 2 years and I use it all the time. The only reason why it's so clean is because I just recently steam cleaned it with a steam cleaner, except for this panel, of course. That wasn't on there when I did it. But anyway, that's my take on the topic of best chainsaw. I am going to go ahead and fire this thing up and show you guys how fast it will cut through some wood, just in case anyone's interested in buying this. I had a hell of a time finding what chainsaw I wanted to buy, and I looked through so many reviews, and a lot of them just came up short. A lot of them, people are just trying to sell you a tool, and you can kind of tell when that's happening. Well, I'm getting sick of a lot of those reviews. I want someone to honestly tell me whether or not I'm buying a piece of shit. And this thing here does have some problems that you might see in the video. I'm going to put a lot of extra footage in here from when I tore this thing apart. One thing I don't like is that the bolts that hold the chainsaw blade on are mounted in plastic. So I don't know if that's going to become a problem one day. We'll see how it holds up. I would rather these bolts that hold this blade on were mounted to the engine frame somehow, but they're not. They're just molded in that plastic, so that's the only thing I don't like about this saw. I'm worried that's going to become a problem. So whatever you do, don't tighten these bolts so tight that it's just pulling the bolt through the plastic. because I feel like I might have started doing that on this one. But as I said, that hasn't become an issue yet. And I looked at some of the other brands, and they are just way too pricey for something I'm not going to be using every day. And there's just no point in spending $500 on a frickin' chainsaw. I can't justify that. So as I said, I'll throw together some footage of this thing running for you so you can actually see it. And there you have it. That's what I call the best chainsaw. For the money, that is. At the end of this video, I discovered I left out one very important thing that a lot of chainsaw users don't know. And that is, how do you tell when your chainsaw blade is dull? See these chips? See how big those chips are? If your chainsaw is generating chips, your blade is okay. Now there is some powder in there, and that's going to always happen, but we got the chips. If your chainsaw does this, all powder, it's time to sharpen that blade up, brother. One more little tip that I forgot to put in that. I don't know how that escaped me, but here we are. I just wanted to share one thing with you about chainsaw maintenance. Fortunately, this particular clutch needle bearing assembly appears to be lubricated. I don't think that's from the chain lube though. I think that's from the way I oil my chainsaw blade. Typically when I'm running my chainsaw, I'll keep a little bowl of oil right there, and I'll just dip the blade right in the oil occasionally, because I don't always trust the oiler. But what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to take some synthetic motor oil. The reason I'm using the synthetic motor oil is because it can withstand very high temperatures, and I'm going to try to avoid getting any of this inside the clutch itself, which is going to be kind of tricky. I'm just going to make sure these needle bearings get a good shot of that oil, which they are refusing to do. Just gonna roll on. There we go. That's something you might want to do if you happen to do a maintenance on your chainsaw. You can see there it appears that I might be getting a little bit of oil thrown inside the clutch, or actually what that probably is grease that was inside this bearing. Came flying out. These clutches get really hot, so that's kind of a big deal that you use synthetic oil for that. But just wanted to point that out. Some of you guys who do like to keep your tools working well might not know your chainsaw has a needle bearing in the clutch, but it does, and it could definitely use a good shot of synthetic oil occasionally. So I basically just found something rather disturbing. This entire casing that you see is molded together with some type of heating method where it was just melted, and then the two pieces joined together. You can see the melted together seams inside the gas tank. So if I were to ever need to get the carburetor off this thing, not sure how easy that would be. There is an air filter on this chainsaw that I have been meaning to get at and change, that is underneath the hood. That's after a couple of years use. Maybe I could get this carburetor off of here still to service it. It looked like the whole thing was unserviceable, but I could be wrong. That's as far as I'm going to go with the teardown on this thing. I really wanted to get inside of here and take a look at the little gear motor that runs the oiler. I can see the shaft for it right there. I don't know if you can see that little round shaft. That apparently goes to the gear motor that runs the oiler. And one thing I do know about two-cycle engines is that their vibrations are so intense, it's often a good idea to tighten up the sealed connections that would allow leaks, especially on the crankcase itself. Oftentimes you'll find a weed eater or a leaf blower in the trash, and you know what's wrong with them? The crankcase bolts themselves are loose. See that little bolt down inside of there? What happens is after intense vibration for a year or two of use, is that bolt gets loose. It's almost as if it's a planned obsolescence tactic. Notice there's no Loctite or anything like that on that bolt. Now what happens is when that bolt gets loose is the crankcase leaks. And the way a 2-cycle engine works is when the piston goes up, it sucks fuel into the crankcase. A reed valve opens like this, and fuel flows into the crankcase. Then when the piston goes down, it pressurizes that fuel mixture in the crankcase and blows it into the piston. But yeah, keep that in mind. If you have a chainsaw, a weed eater, or a leaf blower that's acting up on you and won't start, what you most likely have is a crankcase leak. And one of the major telltale signs of this is sometimes you'll think your engine's leaking gas. You don't necessarily have a gas leak on the gas tank or one of these gas lines. The crankcase itself will start to leak gas. So indeed, I did find a couple of loose bolts. These two here were loose. There is absolutely no lock washer, Loctite, or anything on there. So the second these two bolts loosen up, your carburetor starts to leak, your fuel mixture suffers, and performance dies off slowly on you. So you're losing horsepower. Sometimes it'll still run, and it will be extremely hard to start. If you have any type of vacuum leak anywhere, one sign is that it's very hard to start. This thing is really weird. It's almost like it has two intakes. Maybe that one's just for idle. I think that's what it is. That's what they've done. They've broke the carburetor down into two different setups there. We got the choke. And I guess that carburetor opening just allows the chainsaw to run idle, and then when you want to throttle it up, it has this second chamber here. You can see the boot. Well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder why they've done that. Probably just makes keeping the thing running easy. I've never seen that move before. It's interesting. Uh-oh. I don't know how much I like this. This whole thing is just rubber. Probably leaks like a son of a bitch. Yeah, that's kind of scary. This rubber, if it goes bad, the chainsaw's done for. That's what I'm seeing here. I could be wrong. This could be some kind of vibration material. I'd have to take the whole thing apart to find out. See, I don't know. Not sure what that rubber's all about. It does appear to be sealed with a gasket and some hard material there. So I don't know what this rubber thing's all about. It may just be for the cowling on this thing or something. I don't know. There is a little cowling here that may slide down over that rubber or something. I don't really see that it's been mated up to rubber. There's no clean spot or nothing, but so there you have it. Just remember that if your engine is having trouble starting and you think it's leaking a little bit of gas, you most likely have a crankcase leak or carburetor leak. So just tighten the bolts. This bolt right here was kind of loose, so it probably would have started having vacuum leaks before you know it.